China's playing the long game. They take 2 steps forward, they may take a half step back.
China right now has got some real fundamental problems. Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has no answer for them.
Push things further and further, faster and faster.
China is going to answer the phone when China wants to answer the phone and not before.
In the case of China, tensions with the U.S. have never been greater. But China seems to have no interest in diffusing potential conflict with a hotline to the U.S., similar to the one that was used with the Soviets during the Cold War. Our friend Gordon Chang is here to shed some light on it. Good evening, Gordon. Welcome to Centerpoint.
Thank you so much, Mark.
So when we think about the idea of a hotline between 2 superpowers in the world, it seems to make sense you would want to defuse potential conflict. So why would China not have any interest in this?
Well, China wants to make the privilege of talking to China something special that we will actually give up something for. But we got to remember that whether we have a hotline, a cell phone number, or just a regular phone cord, China is going to answer the phone when China wants to answer the phone and not before. So we should stop, I think, with all this emphasis on communication because it makes the Chinese think they're more important than they actually are.
So when we're thinking about, obviously, in the Straits of Taiwan, in the defense of Taiwan, both sides are doing exercises. Both sides are probably pushing the boundaries of what the other one will allow. There does seem to be the potential for conflict, and just knowing what's going on ahead of time would be a good idea.
Yes. In the Taiwan Strait, you have the Chinese Navy, the U.S. Navy, Taiwan's Navy. Nearby, we have the Russian Navy, Japan's Navy, Australia's Navy. So the South China Sea and East China Sea are very dangerous places right now because everyone's in close proximity to everybody else. The problem is the Chinese are provoking this. They're engaging in very belligerent intercepts in the air and on the sea. And this is just the result of the Chinese regime, the nature of the regime, the aggression. And unfortunately, there's not much that we can do about that except to defend our friends and allies, as well as to defend the freedom of the seas. Because if there's been any consistent foreign policy over the course of the American Republic, it has been the defense of the global commons.
You know, one thing that you and I have talked about many times over the years is China's playing the long game. They take 2 steps forward, they may take a half step back, and then 2 steps forward again, time after time after time. And it seems like this would be an opportunity where if there is a potential mishap, if there is a potential misunderstanding, it allows them to jump 3 or 4 steps ahead because they're just going to blame us.
Yes, they will. And the U.S. has got to be better at communicating this to the world, that the world depends on open sea lanes and air routes, and that we're defending them, and that China wants to close them off. And the world will be a very different place if China and Russia and other countries are able to close off large portions of the global commons. We don't make a very good case of it from a public relations point of view. We have all the arguments on our side. But this is really a failure of the United States to communicate effectively its foreign policy. After the Cold War, we didn't think that any of this mattered, but now that it does, especially because China is very good at it.
You know, President Biden has said repeatedly in a number of different public settings that he does not seek another Cold War, this time with China. While it might seem like great PR, this is actually catnip to the Chinese, who now can push things further and further, faster and faster, because they know that they're going to that we're not going to push back as hard.
Absolutely. And the statements that Biden has been making, they sound good to the ear, but they actually are empty-headed. And as you point out, I think they embolden the worst elements in the Chinese political system by showing everybody else that aggression works. So we really need to change our messaging. We need to work more closely with our allies in the region. And we've got to make it very clear to China that we will defend those interests regardless. And we've got to push the Chinese back. All of our policies over the last 3 decades have just made this situation so much worse.
You know, one of the things that we have talked about in a difference between the old Cold War with the Soviet Union and our confrontation with China is that we were not economically aligned with the Soviet Union, yet we are interconnected with China and in the economy. One of the areas now is the destabilization and the devaluation of the U.S. dollar, which is also partially because of bad policy making here in the U.S., but is also playing into China's long plan.
Yes. Well, there's only one nation that can dethrone the dollar as the world's reserve currency, and that's us. And we can do it with reckless spending and inflation. And unfortunately, the Biden administration is doing a good job of that. China can make only very limited progress because it has a non-convertible currency. And also, it doesn't have a lot of the other advantages that a country needs in order to make its currency the world's reserve unit. So we've just got to have better policy in the United States and remember that fiscal management is so critical to maintenance of the confidence in the dollar.
When we talk about devaluing the dollar, when we talk about global reserve currencies, and you know those are very difficult concepts even for me. What does it mean at home when we talk about to the consumer at home, when we see the devaluation of the dollar, what it means in a global economy and how China might use it?
Well, when we devalue our currency, it means that foreign goods become so much more expensive, and that is exactly what is happening now. Also, when you have the world's reserve currency, you have a lot of flexibility, and there's also, you can use that currency to obtain geopolitical goals, which the United States has done over the course of decades. So that's why maintaining the dollar's status is so critical for us. And it's not just consumers, it's also for the country as a whole.
You know, finally, as we were talking about the economy and we saw that our economy is basically stalled out, China seems to have roared back since the COVID shutdowns and the pandemic, having very strong, probably stronger than expected growth here at the beginning of the year.
Those reports, I think, are greatly exaggerated. From official numbers and from anecdotes, we know that China's economy contracted in the combined January-February period, which is combined for reporting purposes. They came out with impossible to achieve reports for March. And I think they did that because they wanted to show healthy growth in the first quarter. China right now has got some real fundamental problems. Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has no answer for them. And so we're going to see, I think, a lot of really fantastic numbers, especially as they close off sources of information to due diligence firms and to companies, because they just don't want us to know what's going on inside the country.
Misinformation, not just a problem here on social media in the U.S., also with everything that comes from China. Gordon Chang, thank you for joining us on Centerpoint tonight.